Aloha and welcome to Capital Connection with your host, Senator Angus McKelvey. And Senator, I have just sent you on your text message the actual script for the show today, so we're going to get right into it. I'm your moderator, Tom Blackburn Rodriguez. Our guest today is Senator Keohokalole. He is a proud seventh-generation resident of the 24th Senate District. He is the chair of the Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee, which is responsible for business regulation, including insurance, banking, telecommunications, public utilities, licensing, and consumer protection. That is a committee with a lot of responsibilities. And now your host of Capital Connection, Senator Angus McKelvey.
Aloha, Tom, and everybody. Thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, I'm unable to look at my text while I'm using my phone. So, but anyway, that being said, welcome to another episode of Capital Connection, and very pleased to have my colleague and chair of the Senate Consumer Protection Committee, Senator Keohokalole, on today to talk about the issues in his area generally, and specifically how they relate to the recent fire disaster and the impacts that will be felt far beyond the fire zone itself.
And we'll be speaking with him and interviewing him in just a few minutes. But, Senator, there are some things happening in the news today I'd like to bring up for our audience. One of the things that's happening is that, reported in Hawaii News Now, is that Lahaina fire victims are getting notices that they're going to be having to be moving from hotels. What's the story on that?
Yeah, well, there you go. The governor set a deadline of the October 8th, in which all visitors the floodgates will be open to visitors, and they will be coming in. And based upon that, and the fact that there's been no certainty from the Red Cross to the providers, it appears that they're going to be moving people out so they can get ready for the visitors. And so you're going to see many fire victims. I've been warning for weeks and weeks and weeks. This is a trapeze act. You need to have the FEMA system for subsidizing housing in place before we transition to visitors. And because it was seen as a process, it was moving, and then this deadline all of a sudden appeared. And now it appears that the victims are going to be caught between both trapezes and no safety net. And so it's a shame. It's hurtful. I think it's going to cause absolute uproar in the community. It puts, unfortunately, the visitor industry against people in the community. And I think the mayor's idea, and I'll leave it at that, of Kama'aina First was a good one, and I don't understand why it was yanked at a higher level. I think that there was a way forward, and unfortunately, with a deadline and no plan in place, this is starting to happen. And I'm hoping that there'll be at least made immediate assistance. And here's the problem. I'll leave it at this again, too, is it takes time for families to go out and meet with landlords and see places and sign agreements. And when you have a deadline of the 8th with the end of the month, you're not giving, even with the resources all of a sudden magically appear, they're not able to do the process. And so I think at this point now, it falls upon those who put this deadline in place to provide a way forward for everybody.
Well, Senator, my understanding is that about 5,000 or so people have signed an online petition that calls for an extension of that tourism suspension. They think that October 8th is too soon.
Well, it's first of all, it's a very hurtful deadline. I'll be honest with you, especially when before the first was all the discussions up until that snap judgment was made were about phasing in and looking because the situation is fluid. And you yanked the Maui Invitational away from Maui, which would have helped with the visitors for the other parts of the island where that were untouched. And then you turn around and you put in this deadline, and people are signing the petitions. People are seeing the families being forced in the situation. People see millions of dollars being raised by charities and other groups, and yet the victims clearly don't have any access to that money because they're being forced to in the position they're in. And people will be living in their cars, and what message does that send to to the world? Not to mention the visitors, that this is you can't take care of 7,000 people. If you can't take care of 7,000 people, how are you going to care for 1.5 million? And that's really the thing, And again, as I've stressed over and over again for weeks and weeks on end, long before this, as my colleague coming on will attest to, we need a plan to transition people through this process if we're going to do this, so that they're not caught in the lurch. And without a deadline, you can do that. With a deadline now, you literally have cut the rope. And
well, you raised an interesting point in your comments, Senator, about the money that's being raised and who it's going to. There's a lot of discussion about people raising money, but no guarantees that those funds are going to the right sources.
Well, they're going to feed a bureaucracy or feeding machines. I mean, and it's not getting in the hands of the victims. When you hear about millions and millions of dollars, millions, if you were to take a tenth of that, a hundredth of that, and cut it between all the victims who are basically relying on visitor accommodations, they would have been able to have the resources to go out and probably make something happen for their family with the assistance of government. And, to help speed it along. But the thing is that without that, they're stuck. And so it's like, so that begs the very genuine question. Okay, with all this money being raised, and how come the victims are being faced with being basically turned out on the streets from the accommodations they're in now? Do the math.
Well, I know that there's a lot of challenges out there, and we talk about them this morning, but there is a little bit of good news as well. The Lahaina Luna class of 24 has been offered full scholarships from the University of Hawaii. So that is good
news. And I also want to give a big aloha and mahalo to Principal Halley and the Keohokalole High School. As you know, the school just opened. It was a very small incoming class. They welcomed with open arms the Lahaina Luna students there. The first day they were wearing Lahaina Luna red and black shirts and singing the alma mater to welcome the kids. And so the fact that this brand new high school is empty or very minimal capacity, students provided this opportunity because, again, one of the side effects, one of the damages, it's not physical of the fire, is overcrowding on adjoining schools. So, I just want to throw that out. But the university doing that's going to be really huge in helping the kids hopefully be able to take advantage of that.
And I think with the Lilikoi Elementary is also taking students in as well.
Lokilani has as well as Lokilani has as well as Kihei Elementary, and they've been gracious, but it does put a strain on the resources of the school.
It took so many years for that.
We need to really be aggressive about trying to reinstate learning in West Maui in a safe location.
Senator, it took so many years for that high school to be built, and there's still a lot of challenges with student access, but it just opened at exactly the right time because now there's like 500 students who were not going to be there all of a sudden showed up.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a brand new, which is nice, for them to be able to have that. And so, but again, it does, as far as the elementary schools, it does put it puts a strain on the school. So that's why it's imperative, again, and talk about all the things going on, that, if plans are to do temporary, school site like I've heard, then they need to get going on it and have a pathway forward if there is a safe return to a consolidated campus or something in West Maui. I mean, it's sad that the kids are forced to be bused every day back and forth in front of the ruins of their lives. So while it's very gracious, hopefully it is temporary.
Senator, we have on the line our guest for this morning. Senator, are you there? Hello?
I am here. Good morning.
Well, thank you very much, and you are you win the award for Guest of the Year. You called in early, so thank you very much for doing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great to be with you.
Aloha, Senator. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, aloha. Good morning, Angus.
Senator McKelvey, I'm going to step back so the two of you can have a conversation and educate our audience about issues of the day.
Okay, thank you for that. Speaking about flying without a net here, aloha, Chair. Thank you for joining us. You're the chair of the Consumer Protection Committee in the Senate. Could you give our brief, our viewers or our listeners, a kind of a brief description of what responsibilities and area your committee oversees?
Sure, and I know this this area and this committee well because you chaired it for a time in the House Commerce and Consumer Protection deals primarily with regulation of businesses. That's licensing of professionals, from dentists all the way to contractors, of banks. We primarily deal with insurance, which is a huge issue, I'm being told from conversations with you and other members of the community on Maui related to the fire. The Public Utility Commission, which regulates HECO and other public utilities, and general issues of business and commerce. So it's a really broad area of subject matter, but a lot of it, consumer protection, a lot of it has really significant impact on what's going on Maui right now.
Yeah, yes, it does, and that's a really thing. I mean, your area of regulatory oversight over the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs bears into things that I'm out. I want to personally thank you for everything you have been doing to help me in the community, especially in trying to ensure the DCCA and the different entities come out here to engage with the community, in their backyard. One area that you touched upon that is oversight is insurance, with many issues. Can you maybe touch upon some of the top key things that you're hearing from the community and others, insurance issues because of the fire?
Yeah, thanks for that. And then, I've been out to Maui and met with you and met with people in the community because I thought it was really important at the appropriate time to get over there to sort of experience what's going on and get a better sense of how things are happening on the ground. The two big issues that seem to be percolating up to our attention right now are a lack of access to insurance for everyone on the island in response to the fires. We're still in a drought situation, and there's still a danger of wildfire danger on the island. And so since the fires took place, it's become increasingly difficult for people not even in the West Maui or upcountry areas to access insurance for not just for their homes, but for their vehicles. And so just making sure that people have access to coverage going forward as policies expire and people need to renew, that's a huge issue. Yeah. And then the second one, and the one probably everyone can understand and is paying attention to, is helping the fire victims who lost their homes go navigate the process, access their agents and their insurance carriers, allowing adjusters to get on properties that are partially damaged. Or we've heard from businesses that where the buildings were not touched by the fire at all, but they can't access them because they can't get through these areas that are going through the toxic cleanup and remediation. So those are all big issues that we're trying to get a handle on and make sure that the state is being responsive to. It was very important, as you said, for me to make sure that also the insurance division in the State Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs go directly to the island and make sure that they're there, that we push for meetings and official proceedings to take place on the island because so many people lost cars and homes, and because communications have been damaged so significantly, we can't expect people to be able to access even Zoom meetings online right now. So we're trying to make it easy and accessible for people to get information and responses.
One of the things, Senator, one of the things that Angus has talked about is making the state, is it the last line of defense there about not having insurance, or if they pull out of the state? And, are there any plans to make certain that we don't get a Florida situation here?
So making sure we don't end up like Florida and California, where insurers are leaving the market and people don't have any choices, is, I think, Angus, that's basically our primary responsibility.
Yeah, this is why I've been touting the idea, and it's just by good fortune that we have that DAGS, Department of County General Services, was working on legislation to stand up a state captive to self-insure state assets because of the state's own challenges in getting insurance premiums skyrocketing and limitations on coverage. So, the idea is, okay, we have HPIA, which is the lava insurer of last result, which is supposedly this week going to be starting to underwrite statewide after the moratorium was listed. But at the end of the day, like Massachusetts with Florida, because of the fires and this now risk, and now the capacity of the risk pool in their minds being so high and the cost being so huge, they start to pull, HPIA is going to have to be reinsured to be able to operate, or hopefully stay in the market and to keep other insurers in the market themselves to continue to underwrite these policies. So the idea is, let's go ahead and stand up as we stand up a state captive. Maybe that's an avenue for us to provide insurance for these kinds of things. And we saw it, as a chair, we discussed it last session. We saw it starting with the Marco Polo fire in Oahu and condominiums. Not being able, losing coverage and the ability to get, cost-effective coverage that weren't eating into the reserve. So now that this has happened, maybe this is an avenue for us to provide that kind of stability in the marketplace and keep insurers from exiting.
And I think, the overall, I guess sort of like the broader priority is we want a healthy, robust market where there's lots of competition and lots of access so that people who need insurance don't have to struggle calling around and getting rejections, that they'll be able to get multiple quotes and decide on, what policy is best for them, whether they want the cheapest or they want, something that's a premium that they can bundle. That's just, it seems far off from the conversation that's going on in Lahaina and upcountry right now in response to the fires. But there are going to be a number of different potential ways that we can try and maintain that. It's difficult to tell where that's going to be when we get into the legislature in January and then on into the summer. So, in the meantime, we can work with the insurance industry right now, at least to make sure that there's transparent discussion about where each of those providers that have business on Maui, how they're looking at things right now, who has reinitiated their book of business and are taking new clients, and making the process easier for people who are still living in hotels recovering from the loss of their homes to navigate and make sure that their adjusters can get to their properties and pursue their claims. So
exactly. Exactly. I mean, just wanted to that brings up a good point. All of the insurers now, while there's still, while there are many underwriting to the market, insurance commissioners, almost certain all of them will be coming in for rate increases because of the fire. And I think, to have the counterbalance of the captive now becomes even more important. I think that's really where, potentially, in my 2 cents, is the legislature and the insurance commissioner, being the regulatory entity, can try to, to help us in underscoring the fact that, we need a healthy, robust insurance market with competition in it, and that rate increases need to be proportional to the ability of the risk and the ability of people to be able to pay. Otherwise, and this brings up one of the things is undercoverage. I mean, a lot of businesses, because of COVID, coming out of that, sought to basically do general liability insurance, and they didn't insure the contents. And of course, a lot of the contents are destroyed. Do you see that shortfall is something that the legislature may, or the governor through the nicknamed slush fund, to address, to help businesses who are, and maybe, have you heard about underinsurance being an issue potentially?
Oh, absolutely. I've been hearing some horror stories, and what we've done so far is work with the insurance commission to make sure that they're gathering data on what the providers are seeing and what we're seeing on the ground. There are some big outstanding questions when it comes to underinsurance. We know that often local families who do not refinance and pay off their mortgage, for example, often let the homeowner's insurance lapse because they're not paying a mortgage anymore, and the insurance premiums come out with a monthly mortgage. And we don't know how many of those families were in Lahaina and now have lost homes that were essentially not insured at all because the coverage lapsed. I know there is concern. I just heard of some concern as it relates to some of the farmers and ranchers of country as to whether that happened or whether they were underinsured. Exactly what you talked about earlier. We had many families that have gotten denser in the households, added extensions, multi-generational families. Not in Kaneohe, where I live, and in Kailua, where I represent on the windward side of Oahu, we have a lot of those extensions where grandchildren or, children's families are coming in, and a lot of that work hasn't been permitted over time. And if it's not permitted, then they're likely underinsured for that work and are not going to be made whole by their policies. So those are the things that's a whole nother bucket of problems that are just starting to sort of come to the forefront now that we're into this, I don't know what's the appropriate term, Angus, you're on the ground over there, right? But it does seem like we've moved into a different phase of the recovery. And this is part of the conversation we need to start to have, is get an assessment of exactly what happened over there.
Waves. Yeah. These are the tsunami waves that, about a month ago, you and I were discussing that we can see them coming. And everybody is in the impact zone of the first wave trying to deal with that. We have to look ahead, and that's when we started, discussing insurance, the role of the adjusters. One of the issues that's come up, I'll just get your thoughts on that insofar as has been the frustration, structures that were clearly within the burn zone using satellite maps that were, by flyovers could be seen that was destroyed. Those claims can move forward and be processed, but you have a lot of partially damaged homes or structures where there is basically an issue of FEMA and saying, this building has been burned. We consider it structurally deficient and should be looked at torn down. But then on the other side, the insurance company saying it's habitable, the structure is intact. So therefore, we're not going to consider it a total loss. So to those issues you point, how are we dealing with, or what can the state do insofar as people who have either partially burned structures or homes that look to be fine but are damaged internally insofar as insurance goes?
Well, so the quick, easy, and bad answer is, I don't know, right? It's complicated and it's tough, and people need help right now. So what we are trying to do, and I haven't actually talked to you about this since we were able to confirm it, we'll be noticing a Consumer Protection Committee field briefing in Lahaina next week, Thursday the 28th, at the Lahaina Civic Center in the community hall. We just got that approved yesterday. And so we'll be putting out a public notice for that here shortly. And as you know, the focus is just going to be on insurance issues. It seems like there are just so many of these little specific situations where carriers are interpreting what's going on differently among different policyholders, or, different companies are interpreting how they treat claims differently. It would be great to have some clear understanding and guidance on how adjusters are being treated, or how they're treating properties, how they're being able to access properties. And the way this wildfire response has gone, between now and next Thursday, just a million things could happen that change the situation. So what I've been trying to do in the way that's most appropriate from Oahu, because I'm not on your island, is make sure that people have access to the most up-to-date information that's most relevant to what they're going through. And then, like you have been talking about, Angus, we're also trying to keep an eye on what's obviously going to immediately come once we clear this next phase of, imminent response that needs to happen. So, as you know, in Lahaina, they're going through the toxic debris removal, and as they move through, families and adjusters are getting greater access. And so it's really important as that goes through that everybody have a really good, clear understanding of what's happening and kind of so we can create expectations on when the next thing comes up, and then what the plan is to address that when we get there. And then as much as possible in Honolulu, we're making sure that we're prepping and flagging these things for sort of the next cohort of people that need to get online and get access to the island and to the victims, so that we can keep these things moving, and the recovery doesn't have to stop and wait for us to mobilize, contractors.
And that's going to be a
insurance
huge series of challenges and mountains on their own. And one of the ideas I think that hopefully will be discussed at that. And I want to thank you for accepting my invitation to bring the committee out and do the hearing, which is open to everybody in the community. It's the first of what I call thousands of these kinds of meetings, but it's again to everybody. We're going to focus for this one only on insurance issues, and so that we can have a robust discussion, get testimony input, and come up with concise, answers, recommendations potentially of things we need to look at next session, and and again, in keeping with the spirit of just being straight with the community, be bluntly honest, where it comes to it. Maybe there are things we don't know, or the answers may not be what people want to hear, but it'll at least be the information that we know it to be, and it'll be unfiltered.
Senator, on another subject, what about mortgage relief? I've talked to people and heard anecdotally that different banks are handling mortgage relief or abatement differently. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really tricky, and this is another one where, just to be honest, the answers are difficult, and most of them are not great. The state chartered institutions, to my knowledge so far, and we're still working on this, have mostly been very good. And I also want to say, in general, from what I have heard and seen, and again, this is our sort of disconnected perspective from Oahu, is that the insurance industry has been relatively proactive. Now, if victims are hearing from their agents and they're not getting good news, then that doesn't mean anything to them. But it is important that we have the industry engaged and involved. So it is one of the things we're working on with financial institutions. Mortgages are serviced from entities all over the United States. We don't necessarily have the greatest access and reach to some of these mortgage companies that are servicing loans sort of all over the country. We do have access to the local guys. And so I think the strategy, at least at the state level, is to work with our federal congressional delegation to apply as much pressure and open as many avenues of dialogue with the national lenders as possible, and then focus on our state institutions. Make sure that when they're doing, that there's clarity on sort of what the standard response has been, how they're treating the borrowers with forbearance and things like that. And then I would like to come back to the Maui community and get some feedback and dialogue on exactly how it's impacting people on the ground, so that we can figure out how to tailor our response in a way that's the most helpful, but also transparent, so that people do understand. The feeling I got from meeting with the community when we went with Angus last week was, more than anything else, people want the certainty that comes from understanding what's actually happening right now, even if the news is bad.
Mm-hmm. Senator, what are there are two terms that I've heard that I'm not sure I understand. What is back-end abatement versus traditional forbearance?
Me? I'm sorry. This is an important thing, and a lot of our local lenders, have gone this route, which is the route that happened after COVID. And I'm disappointed by the federal response and refusing to lead a conversation and refusing to have the Treasury lead that conversation, as I asked. As some people have said, it's the first of many broken promises of the president and federal government, was to lead a very important conversation at that level about this back-end forbearance, whereby you forbear for 90 to 120 days, potentially longer, and then that money is due at the end of the note. Because right now, the traditional forbearance that's being offered by the national banks, if any at all, is we'll give you 90 days. We'll give you 120 days, but on day 91, 121, you not only owe us for that month coming up, but you also owe us for all the months that have passed right now. And that's clearly unrealistic, untenable situation for people that's going to force them to sell. And if you force them to sell, as the sign says, contrary to the sign, Lahaina is for sale. And that's why this is a huge issue that we need. There needs to be national support, to the chair's point, with the national lenders. But at the same time, the local lenders on their own have gone this route. And so I'm very happy to hear that. And maybe there's a way to facilitate, the support for the good actors insofar as trying to find a way for them to perhaps have these local banks, take these notes and underwrite them. I don't know. Maybe that's one method, but not having a national conversation hurts because, to the chair's point, so many mortgages in this area were underwritten by national banks. And the final real quick point is you have mortgages on houses that burned down. You have mortgages on partially burned houses that can't be occupied, or apartments and condos, but you also have people who've lost jobs and income whose homes are intact and are fine, but yet they can't pay the mortgage. And that's why this spreads so far beyond West Maui. Is a bigger issue.
Senator, your committee also covers telecommunications, and just briefly, we have just a few minutes left in this segment. How are we going to be dealing with the fact that there was just a lack of communication there in Lahaina? I mean, the internet went down, the phones went down. If you weren't at the airport, you really didn't know what was going on. Are there any plans to be able to put in place temporary or kind of machines, telecommunication equipment that allows local communities to have internet and telephone access? Because that was a key thing in terms of people saying, I didn't hear anything until I saw flames outside my house.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And so the response is, I think it's in two parts, is the easiest way to break it down. The first is the third-party investigation that the Attorney General is facilitating. Angus and I were part of the first group of senators once the governor announced that they were going to do a comprehensive investigation, to call for the Attorney General to assign a neutral third party to actually conduct it. And the reason is there's state action that happened before and after the fire, there's county action, and then there's HECO and big landowners are now getting caught up in lawsuits. It's just easier to have a third party that's recognized in the area to figure out exactly what happened, so that we have really good information in the long term on how to better prepare ourselves for these types of issues. We have very detailed wildfire risk maps all over the state. So we should be incorporating the lessons that we're going to learn from this tragedy in how we respond into the future. Communications are obviously going to be a huge part of that, of the story that comes out of that investigation, because so much of the frustration about what happened on that day, as you pointed to, comes from the fact that there was just massive confusion about what was going on, from the responders to the residents, to even people who were watching on TV. The second, so the investigation is really going to dictate how, in the long term, we can figure out how to more appropriately situate our communications infrastructure, in the same way we're having conversations about how we're going to situate our electrical infrastructure, the water system, all of that. I consider communications core infrastructure, just like roads and electricity and water and sewer. The second part of it, which to be honest, I haven't gotten to it yet, but we're going to get to it shortly, is what are the opportunities to, we've just received hundreds of millions of dollars in federal money for broadband connectivity work. Most of it has already been designated to be to fund infrastructure improvements in very rural areas of the state that currently just don't have reliable access at all. So Lahaina is now part of that. And so one of the things we need to pivot toward is where in the process the different pots of federal broadband support are, and whether we need to pivot some of those plans to adapt to the situation in Lahaina. There's a window here where we could potentially do that. It's going to come as part of the phased response, so it's not the immediate top of mind response item for everyone who's dealing with the recovery. My understanding is there are 10,000 Starlinks on the West Maui coast right now, but you can't live stream with that kind of bandwidth. So we do need to figure this out and get to it. I do know that parts of Lahaina are now starting to come online with connectivity. Their standard-based hardline
most of
connectivity.
Lahaina has been they've run the Paniolo cable over the mountain, as has been nicknamed, to provide internet services to the west side. But the point you bring up,
right? But you want redundancy. I mean, to your question, It's a good question. We want redundancy. Everyone now, I'm sure, is hyper focused on that one access point. You could say there's two, but there's really only the one major access point into the West Maui coast. So the fact that electrical, transportation, and communications are all dependent on one access point is just really problematic, and was part of the story of what happened. And we got to deal with that in the long term.
Do you think, real quickly, that one of the issues that the fire, has brought up, and again, it's really a sore point with the community because it happened during Hurricane Lane. 2019 was the fact that power lines came down that were energized and could cause wildfire. I tried to push for undergrounding. We have the public infrastructure pot of FEMA monies made available. Do you think that the state or the should look seriously at regions like this where there clearly is a historical risk and has occurred to perhaps use these federal monies to underground these utilities in these areas?
It's an interesting question, and it's one that we really need to have a meaningful dialogue on. The way Lahaina is situated is very similar to the Waianae coast on Oahu. And I can remember in my lifetime, just about every time we get a hurricane along the southern end of the state, batches of telephone poles on the Waianae coast come down. And, this is not a Maui story, but it's my own personal experience living on Oahu and hearing it. And it's still that west side of the islands that's drier and is really at risk when you get those southern storms. So it is something that we're going to have to discuss. It's so hard to get to the HECO conversation without going off the rails immediately because of everything that's going on right now with the lawsuits, with the national reporting, with the United States Congress getting involved in investigating them. So, HECO is a regulated utility. Their rates are heavily scrutinized through a public process. A lot of their plans, including their infrastructure plans, are also docketed and regulated through that public PUC heavily scrutinized process. I think they're going to get even more scrutiny, obviously, now. Well, yeah. And so we're going to have this conversation about undergrounding, what that's going to take, what that means. But I do want to say, that conversation is not going to happen in a vacuum, right? We're not. Once you start talking about HECO and you start talking about undergrounding lines, we're not going to be able very easily to just stick to that conversation. Every time I've had this discussion, it always ends up getting swept up in the broader what happened, how did we get to this point, and how much are they going to be held accountable for everything. So, we're not going to underground everything overnight. And so it's important that we be deliberate about it and that everybody gets a transparent and open ability to participate and understand and what that's going to take, how long it's going to take.
Well, we do have federal funds now that are available to do it in certain my whole approach has been you identify critical areas where there has already been a history of it, and focus in on that. But now with federal funds, we have an opportunity because the cost issue is what the utilities always raise. It'll hit the ratepayers. It'll cost how much the ratepayers will be. And so now with this federal funding, that does beg the question, why not now? And especially given what happened. But to your point, it will get caught up in the wash, so to speak, the two subjects, which are very different.
Senator, do you feel that the utility might have moved too far into trying to do alternative energy and not far enough into prevention activities, the polls and what have you? Did it get out of balance in your view as a legislator?
So, I think the answer to that question is no. And part of the reason why is that we in the legislature have enacted a number of measures over the last 10 years, 15 years really, to require the state of Hawaii to move off of oil, to move away from fossil fuels, right? So a lot of the things that HECO has been required to do, the legislature enacted in order, to force them to do it. The real meat of I think your question though is how did any of that really relate to what exactly happened on August 8th? And so many stories and videos and things have just flown around the internet and have allowed people from all over the world to just rush to judgment, come to conclusions, and then just run with those conclusions, that I think we gotta follow the process and make sure that whatever sort of long-term decisions we're making for West Maui and for the state of Hawaii are done with the best possible information and a really clear-eyed understanding of what we're doing and how that's addressing what happened. And that's not happening right now.
Senator, you're saying let's not rush in right now with all the passions involved in this issue, but let's do it for a long-term solution. Is that what I hear you saying?
That's right, but I got to balance that with what Angus said. If there are federal opportunities for us to improve infrastructure right away, we should grab that as quickly and as aggressively as we can. But but what I want to do is I want to say that those are two different conversations.
They are, exactly,
right?
Exactly. One of the things I'd like to, hopefully we will look at was the criticisms that came out of after Hurricane Lane, and closed investigation was done, and there was recommendations to do drone analysis of lines and to update the power supply plan, interruption plan for downing utilities, that are damaged, and none of that appears to have been followed through with. So hopefully we can take a hard look at the PUC and their authority that they have to ensure that when these kinds of plans are presented by the utilities, that they're thoroughly vetted and that things identified to be done are done and the plans are updated. So hopefully that's something that can be looked at as a separate conversation that will travel with the rest of the school of the fish.
Oh, well, right, and then Angus is dead on about that, right? I mean, I think that's the answer, is that there's a certain amount of information that we already know that we need to run with and take advantage of as quickly as is feasible. But as it relates to, are we going to underground every telephone pole in the state of Hawaii? No. What is that going to take? Once you start somewhere, what are the other communities? I live on the windward side of Oahu. Is East Maui gonna say it's not fair for you to only underground poles in West Maui when you only have the infrastructure funding, to prioritize wildfire areas? We got to have those conversations more deliberately at a point when the people who have suffered from the fire have been more appropriately taken care of, in my view, from Oahu, not on Maui as of today, right now. So part of it is getting out over there and providing an opportunity for people to have a dialogue, and then having open conversations about all of this stuff, so that we can calibrate our response in a way that's, effective and gives people a feeling like they're being heard and being allowed to participate.
Exactly, and the conversation's a continuing one, so that the next time we come back is like, hey, this is what was brought up last time, this is where we're at, these are new things that are happening. So it's a start of an organic process, and so I thank you, Senator, for helping us do that in this area of insurance to start with.
Senator, one of your areas of your committee is business regulation. Do you see any need for any new regulations dealing with businesses, when they're building or retrofitting, whatever, to protect their buildings or against fires, to perhaps reduce the impact of fire that might be on their businesses? We attended, and the senator made a great presentation last night at the KCA Community Association, at the Keohakale Community Association, and one of the things that one of the presenters said is that the fire department is the last resort. But there's a whole number of things that we can do as a community and businesses. Do you see any need for tweaking any regulations in that area?
So, when it relates to structures, that's building permits, that's building code, that's county. And I have gotten myself in a lot of trouble over the years, inserting the state government into county functions. We should have the conversation for sure. We're dealing with, as Angus said, on Oahu, in response to the Marco Polo fire, a process that essentially is requiring many 30, sometimes 40-year-old, 12, 14, 25-story condominiums to suddenly install water sprinkler systems on these aging buildings that are going to cost, millions of dollars. And it's caused a lot of disruption and uncertainty. But it's really difficult to argue that they're not necessary public safety required measures. It's just, how do you pay for them, and how do you do it in a way that's not going to be so disruptive that people have to move out because of the expense. Same thing with, the rate increases that you would probably expect HECO to ask for if we're going to suddenly require that we underground telephone poles across the state of Hawaii. It's just, how do you, dealing with that, and then car insurance rates and homeowners insurance rates, and what's going to happen with pricing and access to those policies. So how do we do it in an open and transparent way where everybody has an understanding of what the sort of ancillary costs are going to be to it? I tell you what, where we will focus specifically in our committee is going to be on professional licensing. It's not quite, I think, ripe for that yet. But once we begin the rebuilding process in earnest, I am very concerned about having sort of unscrupulous contractors and people operating. I know probably some of that is already going on Maui. We're trying to monitor it. But we're going to have to figure out a way to get people appropriately licensed so that we have enough workers on the island to help deal with the wildfire response and the reconstruction, while also making sure we're not having shady characters just roll in who are unlicensed and then provide shoddy work or rip off these fire victims. Because we did see some of that during Iniki. We have seen it in some of these other disaster situations.
Yeah, we saw
this is another one that we need to be ready for and try and get out ahead of. We will be coming back to Maui for those conversations once we clear this next phase, and the toxic removal and debris removal is completed.
Senator, we have about 30 seconds left. You want to wrap up?
Engage the Contractors Licensing Board to try to create an umbrella entity to which any contractor would have to pass through to be eligible to work. Hopefully, that'll provide a way for labor to get individuals trying to individualize the repair or rebuild down the road, but yet not have the issues you touched upon.
Senators, we have to wrap it up. Tom, we have just a few seconds left in this segment. Is there anything you'd like to say before we move on?
Well, my aloha goes to Maui. Whenever we're asked to come, I'm coming. We want to be appropriate not to insert ourselves into Maui business. Being on a different island, we see what's going on. We're here to help. I thank you for your time, Angus. I know you and your community are going through it, so I'm happy to be on with you guys and want to keep continuing these conversations. So mahalo.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Definitely. So we'd love to take a deeper dive in the future, and thank you for helping us kick off our first hearing from the community on these insurance issues. Again, thank you.
Senator Senator McKelvey, we do have some resource update information to give to our audience. The FEMA is still there. The helpline is 800-621-3362. And remember, if you've been turned down, apply again. Red Cross is 800-733-2767 if you need help from the Red Cross. The DUA, the last day to apply is September 25th for the DUA program. And on the Filipino Resource Fair at Lahaina Civic Center is Saturday, the 23rd from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., and that's with the Maui Filipino Chamber of Commerce and Filipino Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii. And also for SNAP benefits, there is going to be a workshop on that at the Hyatt Regency Maui, always going on there, where you can apply from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Those already on SNAP do not need to apply. We're still looking at getting information on the TANF program. So these are all...
Okay, well, if you want to go ahead, it's not a workshop. It's the only portal in which fire victims can sign up to get this variation of SNAP.
So they go in person for that.
But for some strange reason, they're refusing to open it through the internet, and instead you have to physically go to this one location and this one location only. To do this, you have to show that you meet income asset level tests, which are far below what most victims make to live in West Maui, so it's unrealistic. And it's quite a convoluted process, so get ready to go through a lot of hoops for a $500 card for 1 month.
Thank you very much, Senator, for correcting us on that. Tune into Capital Connection every Wednesday at 7 a.m. right here on KOI at 11:10 a.m. and its affiliated FM stations, including 95.1 FM, reaching all of West Maui. Senator, aloha.